All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about PET plastic. You know, the stuff that makes up our water bottles, our food containers. I mean, it is absolutely everywhere. And right now, the huge global market for this everyday material is being completely upended by a pretty unexpected shockwave. And that brings us to the big puzzle we're going to solve today. See, with all the old rules getting tossed out the window, billions of pounds of this plastic are suddenly looking for a new place to go. So this is the critical question. Where does it all end up? And here's the trigger for the whole thing: new US tariffs. Look, this isn't some small policy change. We're talking about a massive trade barrier going up around one of the world's biggest buyers. And the timing? It just couldn't be worse, because the global market is already swimming in excess PET. It's a real recipe for chaos. So let's start at the epicenter of all this disruption, the American market. We're going to look at how this one single decision creates the first massive ripple effect that's felt all across the globe. Okay, so this chart gives you a quick snapshot of the before. Just look at the big players here: Taiwan, South Korea, Thailand. Together, they made up over 40% of US imports. It's clear America was leaning heavily on Asia. Now, remember those names, because this is the after. That tariff wall is very real, and it is steep. I mean, we are talking about duties hitting 50% for India and 15 to 20% for those major Asian suppliers we just saw. A tariff that high, well, it isn't really a negotiation tactic. It's basically a do not enter sign. And what this does is create a really clear divide. So thanks to the big trade deal, the USMCA, Canada and Mexico are the obvious winners here. They're totally exempt. And the losers? Well, all those Asian nations that built their business model on selling to the US market. Overnight, their products are just way too expensive to compete. Get this, 23%. That's how much the US imported from Canada and Mexico back in 2024. Now, with their main Asian competitors pretty much sidelined by these new tariffs, you can bet that number is about to skyrocket. So, with the US store basically slamming shut, you'd probably think all that surplus plastic is just going to flood into Europe, right? Well, it's not quite that simple. As we're about to see, Europe has been building its own fortress. And this isn't some kind of sudden reaction either. Europe has been methodically putting these defenses up for a while now. They started with China, hitting them with anti-dumping duties for selling PET below cost. And now, as other suppliers try to rush in and fill that vacuum, Europe is investigating them too. They're closing every potential loophole, one by one.
And if you want to know why they're being so aggressive, here it is. The second Europe put up walls against China, imports from Vietnam surged by a staggering 90%. It just goes to show how lightning fast these trade flows can pivot, and that's exactly the kind of diversion that regulators are determined to stop.
So the end result here is that Europe, a lot like North America, is regionalizing. They're turning away from those far-flung Asian suppliers and cozying up to partners that are closer to home, like Turkey and Egypt. It just makes more sense geographically and financially. The global market is literally breaking apart into pieces. Which, of course, brings us to our third ripple. I mean, think about it. If the two biggest markets on the planet, the US and the EU, are both putting up walls, what on earth happens to those giant exporting nations in Asia? Well, the pressure is becoming immense.
Just try to wrap your head around this number: 7 million tons. That's roughly how much PET China alone exported in 2024. So as the world's biggest exporter, with its main customers now closing their doors, China has a very, very big problem to solve. And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures their new game plan. They can't depend on a few massive customers anymore. So instead, they have to fragment their sales. They're scrambling to find dozens and dozens of smaller buyers all over the planet just to make up for the volume they've lost.
And make no mistake, this is not just a China story. Remember those other big Asian exporters we talked about? Taiwan, Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand. They are all in the exact same boat. They are getting squeezed out of their best markets, and now they have to compete like crazy with China and with each other for a much smaller pool of customers. Okay, so we've seen the doors closing, we've seen the pressure building up. Now we are finally ready to answer that one big question we started with. Where does all of this displaced plastic actually go? All right, so after all that, where is this global surplus gonna find a new home? It looks like there are 3 new relief valves for the whole system. First up, Africa. Growing economies like Nigeria and South Africa are ready to absorb these rising inflows. Second, Russia.
Since it's cut off from the West, it now represents a huge, hungry market for all that surplus Asian supply. And third, Latin America. We're talking about smaller markets with fewer trade barriers that are basically open for business. This is the new map.
So when you start to put all these pieces together, it becomes really clear this isn't just some temporary glitch in the system. These ripples have all combined to permanently redraw the global trade map for this entire industry.
This table really shows you the new reality at a single glance. We've gone from a deeply interconnected global market to what looks like three separate regionalized trade blocs. You've got North America looking inward, Europe focusing on its neighbors, and Asia being forced to blaze entirely new trade routes into emerging markets. The old map? It's gone.
But when you zoom out, this is about so much more than just plastic bottles. What we are really witnessing is a textbook example of a new era of protectionism. This combination of tariffs and trade defenses that we're seeing here, well, it could very well be the blueprint for how a lot of other global industries are going to be reshaped in the next few years. Which really just leaves us with one final, very big question. We can see the immediate winners and losers from this whole reshuffle pretty clearly. But in this new era, as global trade fractures into these regional blocks, who is ultimately going to come out on top in the long run? Honestly, that's something the entire world is now waiting to find out.